have our next presenter, Greg Blomquist. Yay! Woo! With Pluggable providers. Thank you.
Can I get a standing ovation before? All right, can everybody hear me with like this?
You won't get one after.
That's damn right. Can I say damn up here? Okay, I got to bring the energy level down or else I'll go too fast. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about pluggable providers. Hopefully everybody kind of has an idea of what this is. Before I get started, I want to give a little shout out to a couple of people that helped make this happen. We've been talking to John Hardy about this for, I don't even know how long now, at least as long as I've been involved in the project, probably longer. And he has put together, he's taken all these thoughts that we've been throwing at him and put it into some structure of a plan. Instead of us just saying, we want to do this, and we want to do this, and we want to do that. He started saying, well, what you kind of need to do is list it out in a way that makes sense. So he helped us kind of put that together. And then Marianne was the one that actually came up with this format here that I think everybody's using. So thanks, Marianne. Thanks, John. I'm Greg Blomquist. I don't say it quite as well as Carol can say it because I'm not actually Swedish or from Scandinavia. That's my handle, @Blomquist. That's pretty much everywhere. That's GitHub, Gmail, Twitter, though I don't really tweet, Facebook, all those places. I even have I know we're not supposed to say this, but I have a Blomquist @redhat.com alias as well. A little bit about me. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. That's a nice view of the skyline from the West Hills. I miss the mountains and the city and everything. Couple cool things about Portland. It's the home of microbrews. It's amazing the number of microbrews out there, hundreds, and this is just a few of them that I've actually sampled. Yeah. It's called a little bit of this. Now I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. It is the city of oaks, I guess. No, there's a lot of cool things about Raleigh. It also has a good microbrew startup culture. Just outside of Raleigh is the city of Durham, and there's a really nice, great, startup culture there of businesses. I know some people that I've worked with in the past that are really trying to revitalize that whole area, and it's really taking off. It's really cool. At some point in time in my history, I used to write code. Probably about as good as that dog does right there. I also, many jobs ago, did also used to wear a tie. But I haven't done that in a long time. Now I look a lot more like this guy, manager-y type stuff. But what are we talking about? What's the pluggable provider stuff? John had a great quote in his slide deck, which was, ManageIQ providers should be owned, maintained, and released by the provider author. So that's the overall goal of this whole thing, to empower provider authors to have that entire life cycle under their control. And today, that's just not reality. Today, if you are a provider author, you're dependent on us, on ManageIQ, to get your pull requests through, to get your changes released out to the community. You're completely dependent on our project, and we want to make that not the case. So how do we do that? We put together a little bit of a plan. So we want to namespace things, put providers in their own namespace, so that when you're talking about a provider, you know exactly where it lives, who it is, what it can do, and it's not mixed in with all the other code. We want to ask and not assume what providers can do. Today, we do a lot of assuming. You can look to the code, and you can see places where we say, if you're this type of provider, you should do this type of thing. And if you're not this type of provider, maybe you should do something else. Instead of just saying, hey, provider, what can you do? I'll get into some examples of that as we go on. And then we want to gemify. So this is something that Oleg was talking about a little earlier during the keynote, which is this is the actual act of pulling the provider's code out and putting it into its own repo. There's a number of steps involved there, and we'll talk about some of that and kind of where we are with that process. And then finally, we want to create a generator, which would make it easier for new provider developers to create a provider. Today, you have to know a lot about ManageIQ in order to create a provider. And there's a lot of hidden magic in there. And I'll show some of the hidden magic. But what we want to do is say it should just be a quick and easy one-line thing, and you have your provider available. That's kind of where we stand right now. Namespacing's done. I'm going to show you. I got a little head bob from Heiko. So it's mostly done then. Ask, don't assume. It's in progress. It's happening. Gemify, same thing. It's going. Generator, haven't even started it yet. We've talked about it, but there's no code in place. So let's go through some of these. Namespacing. We kind of have to take a step back into history. Some of you might remember about 18 months ago when we had this summit, and me and Jason stood up probably in this same ballroom, maybe the next one over, and talked about our goals for pluggable providers. And it was a lot more amorphous back then. We had some ideas about what we wanted to do, but not quite figured out how we were going to do it. But this is what we started with. It was just a big pile of spaghetti. And I put this slide in here, and actually this is a copy from the 18 months ago. I put this slide in here, and immediately in the back of my head, I heard Rich Oliveri's voice. There he is. I heard him say, pasta. I was like, it's not pasta. This is what we do. And I even showed this as a preview to Josh Carter, and he said that. And I went to the next slide and said, it's not pasta. It's the past. This is what we dealt with. But this is a more accurate representation. Can anybody tell me what that is? Salt and pasta? Is that what you said? Yeah, I heard a couple of people say app model. So this was actually VMDB app models out of the Anand release. So this is what we were looking at. And this isn't even all of the models. This is the models and the directories that contain more models and more directories that contain more models. It went down pretty deep. And if you were working on one provider, you had to exist in this ecosphere when you're trying to make changes to your provider. If someone had come to me and said, and they did, we need you to make like sweeping changes to OpenStack things, you'd have to go through here and find all the classes that deal with OpenStack things. Here, I'll make it easier. I'll highlight them. So this little shotgun spray right here of OpenStack classes is the same for all the different providers, just in a different pattern. So every single provider is listed here. And I think at the time we had eight providers. So if you needed to make changes to your provider, you were living alongside every other provider in one place. And that doesn't even talk about if you needed to go change EMS refresh. You'd have to find out where EMS refresh was, find your refresher alongside all the other refreshers, and change that one. This is what we wanted. We wanted to take that spaghetti and just kind of at least bucket it together. So yeah, you're never going to get rid of all the spaghetti code, but at least you can make it a little bit more componentized, right? This is what it actually looks like. So now we have app models, ManageIQ providers. All the providers live in one place, except for one, and I'll get to that one. But that list of directories there, that's our providers. It's really easy to see. They're all under the directory of ManageIQ providers, so they're all namespaced in one place. And if someone came to me and said, I need you to change something about OpenStack, it's right there. I know where to go. It's all under OpenStack. And I can even talk about like a particular class. So this is what it looks like to have a namespaced OpenStack Cloud Manager. And I'll even highlight some pieces. So we kind of dim out the ManageIQ providers because every provider has that. This is OpenStack, and this is OpenStack's Cloud Manager. So I can look at that and know what that class is easily. And that's where it lives. So I can look at the class structure, the naming structure, and know where it lives in the file system, and I can look at the file on the file system and know what class I'm talking about. So namespacing. Bling. Done, right? Except for Heiko says we're not done. But what is Heiko talking about? I think he's talking about this, which is we have a lot of places where we assume what a provider can do instead of asking, what can this provider do? This is code in our code base today. So what is it saying? It's saying if this EMS, which is a manager, is a OpenStack Cloud Manager or an OpenStack Infra Manager, go retrieve some OpenStack-specific security protocols. Otherwise, assume that it's going to be those security protocols if you support security protocols. Wouldn't it be nice if it just looked like that? So we just say, hey, EMS, give me your security protocols, and we just dump them in there. Now, obviously, it's never going to be that easy, right? We'd have to track down what other implications there are for consolidating security protocols like that. We may have to have some kind of way to know, does this provider even support security protocols? We have to make sure that that method returns a certain structure, that whoever's storing those security protocols can rely on that structure. But one of the other things that's happening right now is Marcel is putting together this supports feature mix-in. And he's going to talk about, I think, some of this stuff a little bit later in the week. But I wanted to touch on some of this because it starts to talk about other ways in which we can start asking instead of assuming what providers can do. So we can start asking, what features does this provider support? And it's a really cool, it's a really cool first approach at creating a DSL around this. So we can begin exposing this to people that are writing providers, and they can tell us what kinds of features they expose through this DSL. So ask, don't assume. We're working on it. It's not done by any means, but we're getting there. So Gemify. As Oleg was talking earlier during the keynote, there's this notion of take the provider code out of ManageIQ and put it into its own repo. And it gives us this capability of allowing the provider authors to completely own what the provider does. So I'm going to pull a Marco Rubio. So again, Marcel started looking at this. If you haven't guessed yet, Marcel's kind of our pluggable providers guy. You can see we have a directory here, ManageIQ Gems, ManageIQ Providers, Amazon. So remember previously when I was showing the list of providers, and I said there's one missing, it was Amazon. And we have started gemifying Amazon. So we've started pulling it into its own gems directory. And, well, I'll talk about this first. You can see that the model structure is the same as if it was still in the code base. So all the code inside of Amazon that talks about those namespace classes is all the same. It's all, nothing has to change when we picked it up and moved it. We didn't have to change the way those classes reference each other. And so, you know, there's just like, I think Oleg talked about this a little bit, why do this? And it goes back to that central theme that John had on his slide deck, which is ManageIQ providers should be owned, maintained, and released by the provider author. That removes ManageIQ as a bottleneck for PR reviews. You get all, you decide when it's good, when it gets merged. You decide when it's good enough to be released. And our involvement at that point is we include a gem. And obviously the relationship, it doesn't mean there's a wall there, right? We don't just build a wall and say, you guys go do your provider and we're going to ignore you. We're going to have that communication still. But it means that the pace at which you work is your pace. So Gemify, as you saw, we're working on it. We only have one in place. One of the interesting things about trying to gemify these providers is each time we pull one out, we find more places where we're assuming and not asking. So we have to refactor how that works, build more strategies for asking the provider, pull that back into the gem, and then keep that whole cycle going. And then we'll do the next provider, pull it into a gem, and we'll find more places that we're assuming and not asking. So it's a very cyclical process to get this done, and that's why it's not just, oh, just pick it up and move it, and you're done, put it outside into another repo, and bam. Nope, just can't be that easy. A generator, this is that last step of that plan that we've been talking about. And before I get into the evils of what it looks like to put together a provider today, the pain that's involved, no, I'm going to jump right into that. Straight into the pain. So life without a generator. Some of you will recognize this as the MIQ server worker management monitor class names file. If your workers are not listed in those list of words there, MIQ server will not start your worker. It's one of the hidden secrets of ManageIQ of how MIQ server knows which workers to start and which workers to kill when it goes down, so that it cleans up all the processes when it stops. So maybe someone told you about this and maybe you get it done. But did you also update config settings YAML? Because if you didn't, when your workers start, they explode. And who knows what they take with it? Okay, so maybe you did that, but did you make sure all your workers have runners? And do you even know what workers and runners are? And do you know where they live and what they do and why we have both? Maybe not. Should you know? Maybe not. Did you require nested everything? Do you know what require nested is? Did you know that require nested is a ManageIQ specific thing? All of these questions about like how to make sure you filled all the gaps. And these are just a few of them, the things that I could remember as I was writing these slides. I haven't put together a provider in a long time, so I don't remember all the little nuances. I mean, Joe probably could have told me more about more hidden secrets about what needed to be done to get this in place. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just do this? Click here to start your provider. So Rails generate provider, provider name, and a list of manager types. And then you're done. Well, you're not done, obviously, but you get some boilerplate code put in place. You don't have to worry about the class names file and making sure that you've put your workers in the right place. And you don't have to worry about updating the settings YAML to at least get a baseline set of settings. And you don't need to worry about all your workers and runner files or whether you require nested everything. It's just done. It's done for you. And an example might look like this. So Rails generate provider, my provider, is going to have a cloud manager and a network manager. And when I'm done with that, I have a cloud manager and a network manager under my provider, and I should be able to start it, and it should just run. It should even be in the UI as a selectable provider, and I could just add it. Too bad. So we haven't started it yet. It's a great plan. It's probably even not that hard. It's just one of the things that keeps on getting pushed off to the back burner because we have other big things to get done. Hey, a lot of people in the room. Maybe someone can make a PR, said Oleg. Do I need to give you a mic? So before I finish up, I want to talk a little bit about just kind of changing the conversation around providers. So even in like Oleg's keynote, we're talking about provider types. But we don't really have provider types. We have providers. So we have OpenStack, and we have Google Cloud, and we have Amazon. But those aren't types of providers. Those are just names of providers. What we really have is manager types. So we have things like a cloud manager, which sits underneath of a provider. Cloud networking manager. Maybe soon a cloud storage manager. So if I looked at it kind of pictorially, it might look like this. So provider has a set of managers under it. And OpenStack, for instance, would look a lot like this. It has a cloud compute manager, a cloud network manager, and a cloud infra manager. So instead of saying OpenStack's just a provider. It's just a name that sits over the top of this stuff. Each one of those things, each one of those managers has to be involved in knowing how to collect the data, how to process metrics, how to do interesting things that people care about. The top thing's just a name at that point. So we start customizing these different managers for each of the different providers so that it works for that provider's context. But the manager is the thing that's doing all the work. This is a nice kind of depiction that John had put together. That shows you across the top these different types of managers and the different providers that give you that functionality. So if you look at virtual infrastructure, there's not a lot of repeats there. But if you look at cloud compute and cloud networking, you see those lists look pretty similar because those guys provide those management pieces really similarly. And to us, that's really great because we can have a baseline, cloud compute manager, customize it to how either Amazon or Google or whoever else wants to provide that functionality and not have to rewrite an entire provider every time a new provider comes online. All right, that's it for me. Questions? I got one. Oh.
Yeah, I'm actually just wondering regarding the UI parts of the provider, how it is combined in the whole picture here.
So that's where that whole ask and don't assume part plays in. Because a lot of, no, yeah. Well, and I'm assuming, no, so in the UI, there's lots of assumptions about because a certain provider is a certain type. I said provider type, didn't I? Because a certain provider has a certain manager type, oh, there we go. It has a certain functionality. And what we want to do is say the UI really knows to ask the provider, hey, provider, can you do this thing? Because if you can, I should probably show this button. And if you can't do this thing, I'm going to hide this button. As we keep on doing that, iterating over that process, the UI gets less and less dependent on the specific providers and gets more and more dependent on the provider type, the manager type functionality. I'm going to get this one day. And then as we get closer and closer to that, then we can start talking about how do we take that UI piece and just pull it out and put it in its own repo and maybe have a couple different types of UIs, such as like the self-service UI and a new admin UI that Oleg was talking about, and other views into the same data that we have today by asking providers instead of assuming what they can do.
So you are basically saying you are going to uniform the provider manager for different types, and just everything is going to be using the same base functionality?
He said, no mics. There's this distinction between the manager implementation and the manager type. The manager type is always going to have to be within the core ManageIQ team. So as we start developing new manager types, we're going to have to be involved in understanding what data models are going to be there, what kinds of base functionality is there, what kinds of base features, like supported features, are going to be available. So we can understand what the UI can ask of that manager type. And then as it gets customized, maybe new things will come out of that, and maybe the provider has to even give a little chunk of UI that gets added in. At this point, we don't have that roadmap yet, but I know I've heard people talking about, like, that would be nice to do. We just don't have a plan yet to get that chunk of, like, how to get new UI pieces in place yet.
So the idea is really to first drive the UI off of metadata that is provided by the provider, be it in callback, be it in YAML files, and perhaps also that you have the way to say for a screen X, dear provider, if you just deliver the UI snippet for me and I'll display it for you.
Yeah, I don't think, so the one piece being like the YAML definition, I know we do a lot of that today with some of the like supported products and things like that. So I know that's an existing example, and then we definitely want to have I don't know if I'd call it callbacks in my head that like harkens back to MFC days, but yeah, that kind of idea, and then yeah, right, have some kind of snippets that could be placed in.
So I mean, I'm just asking from our JBoss On legacy, where we had a not exactly provider like you did that, but these management plugins where we had XML metadata, which was completely driving the UI. So determining what is displayed, in what way is displayed, which tab are available and not, depending on a feature set of this plugin, which is similar. And we never really got to have the plugin provide parts of the UI because it was not exactly doable in that framework. But we really found out that it would be very important for many pieces because the standard functionality is not enough, and you really have these special cases where you want to show additional data or different visualization of architectures and whatnot that you could.
Yeah, I think one of the things in ManageIQ today, and I am not an expert on the UI side, and I know there's a ton of functionality that can be done there. One of the things that can be done is providing like custom dialogues and custom buttons. So maybe that's something we can start looking at, how to tie that notion in to providing this kind of pluggable UI piece. Like I said, I'm not the best person to ask about how to make those pieces work, because I'm terrible at both automate and also the UI side. So, but I don't know. Does that help answer? I don't know. Okay. 2 in the back, I guess. You guys want to like come up or something? No?
It's okay.
No, they don't. I would like to sit, please.
Hi. So my question is about cross-provider integrations, if you have any plans on making it more powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, not specific plans, but yes. So, today it is very one-off. So, for instance, we have under OpenStack, we have multiple managers, and those managers have to be kind of cross-pollinated. And in those cases, it's pretty specific to OpenStack. And then we have, if you take a step back and look at the container world, containers have to know like what VM they're running on. So they have to have that kind of integration. That's done today. But it is very specific to that interaction. So yeah, we do need to figure out a way to make that a little easier. And I've heard some discussion. I think like Brandon, he had an idea about. I think that borrowed from some of the concepts that Rich Oliveri did several years ago on the storage side, that gives you this. Kind of mapping of how different things relate to each other. So we could explore some of those ideas and figure out how to make those custom mappings work.
There is some work done in the topology views for the cross-linking so that you can go to the next level.
Yeah.
And I know you said that you're not a UI expert, but my question is, if you have multiple providers of the same type, how would that live together? And if there's any plans to make it more seamless or more integrated, so the providers will not look as separated as different tabs and things like that. So the dialogues will be more integrated and so on. Is there any plans in that kind of direction?
I don't think I understand the question.
So you have you want to manage both Ceph and Gluster under the same UI. They have a different feature set. You need to add both providers, and you want the flows to not look like completely different UIs, right? So right now.
Yeah, I mean, today we have. This is probably not the best way to create an analogy here, but we do have things like multiple cloud compute managers. And when you look at the list of instances, you'll see all of the instances listed for all of those cloud compute managers. They won't be segregated off into their own areas. And for instance, like even provisioning, the kind of baseline provisioning that we provide out of the box combines those different cloud compute managers together, so you can follow the same process of provisioning to get what you want, even if you're provisioning to different clouds. So maybe that's kind of the same thing. We don't really have right now that level of storage support that I think you're talking about with Gluster and Ceph. So
was this an example?
Oh no. Yeah. So I think for along those lines, we'd have to figure out what are those commonalities, and then make sure we stick to that as we go through.
So you want to talk tomorrow. So
I think I saw one.
where's the
So,
Don't put me on the hot seat, man.
yeah. Do you have any plans or thoughts about sharing code between providers? I'm thinking about like how the containers manager types will look. So we will have like a couple or 3, and they will have the kind of the same code.
Yeah. So that was one of the things we definitely went through for the rest of the room when the container guys were trying to create all the different types of container providers under their, I did not do that, under their container manager implementation, and we had some restrictions on some of the workers that if you didn't have, if you had subclassed one worker from another, we wouldn't start them correctly, or it would assume that one worker was actually another type because it was subclassed from that one. A little object-orientedness right now, and that was really painful. That was we have talked about that a lot, how to fix that those types of problems. And I think, I mean, unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the point of figuring out how to make that work in the worker management piece. I think there's
So the question is, you mentioned the work you're doing to gamify the Amazon provider. So hypothetically, if you plan to write a new provider or rewrite a provider now, how, should you do it? Should you gamify it now or not? I mean, theoretically, because we are doing this work now, and I wonder whether we should try to make it gamified from the beginning, or to, or at least know to do the right things in order to be able to gamify it better in the future.
So Jason and I stand on the spectrum, and he's on one side, and I'm on the other. Because I'm all timid. I'm like, I don't know, maybe you should put it in the code. And he's going, no, just do it, gemify. So I would say gemify, and then ask Jason. No, I mean, seriously, though, it's... Yeah. But I mean, seriously, it probably is a good idea to start down that path, and then, because what's going to happen is it's going to be, whoever does it first is going to be the guinea pig, because Amazon was pulled out of the code. This would be the first time one was started outside of the code to begin with. There's going to be new and interesting problems that come from that versus extracting from the code. Because when you extract it from the code, there's still a little like as Heiko was kind of shaking his head. When you take it out of the code, there's still all these tidbits left there that, hidden functionality that lets it work because it was all kind of scattered through the code. If you add one from scratch, there's going to be a lot of stuff that just doesn't work because there's lots of assumptions happening. So that would, we need someone to do that. We just don't have one on the table right now for us to start. I don't know, that probably doesn't answer your question at all.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, we have.
I like the matrix that you have. Could you bring the matrix back that you showed of the various providers?
Man, we're in the matrix. No,
Yes. So could you just kind of comment on what do you see as the outcomes over the next 6 to 9 months in terms of what kind of results we could expect?
I know so cloud networking is up there, and Ladislav on our team has actually done a lot of work to put that in place across all of them. 6 to 9 months out, more networking, which we're going to hear about tomorrow. Probably storage, cloud storage. So if I'm talking about, this dude right there, middleware, right, applications.
You mean public cloud storage?
Public cloud storage.
Okay,
so I know that's on the roadmap. I don't know how quickly we can get to it, but that's something that, I mean, just in my own head, like the idea of saying, in my own head, this is how it works. I could easily see us providing that, even standalone. So I want to add Amazon and just use S3.
ABS.
Yeah, right, yeah. So yeah, that would, those are a couple ideas, I think. What's that? Can I say that? Yeah. Hardware. I can say that. Oh my gosh. I didn't. It's like, I don't know, I'm not Dutch. I don't know if I can say that or not. How do you say it? Oh, you missed the D, hardware. I guess that's it. That's all I have time for? Okay.
All right, let's give Greg a round of applause. Thank you.